For more on the Trump administration's decision to send federal forces into U.S. cities, attorney Terry Austin joins us now. Terry, good to have you. As we mentioned, federal forces are now being sent to Chicago, Kansas City, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, in addition to Portland, Oregon. Is the president able to do this? It's such an unusual move to send in federal forces against the request of local leadership. Can you give us a little bit of context?
Well, I think the argument that Trump is making is the fact that under the Insurrection Act, he can send the military or, in fact, the National Guard, which actually he's already done in June. If you recall, in D.C., he sent the National Guard to pave a way for him to have this photo op. So that's one way he could do it. He could also say under the Patriot Act that he has a right to send in Homeland Security agents, which he has, in fact, done in Oregon. So there are opposing arguments to both of those. In Oregon, of course, we can argue the fact that there's a First Amendment right to protest. And as fact as what he did in D.C., we could also argue that there was no reason to do that. No one asked him to do it. So it's interesting. There are arguments on both sides.
That's very interesting because usually if the president was going to use these powers in the Insurrection Act or otherwise, generally speaking, those troops would be sent at the request of the state or local government. I'm just wondering, is there anything that these local leaders can do, or does the president just really have the authority to supersede them when it comes to their local communities?
Well, it's interesting because originally he was saying, I don't need them to ask for help. I can do it on my own. And now he literally just had a press conference where he said he's waiting for the local authorities to ask for help. So he's probably been advised at this point that he needs to wait until he's asked for help from the local authorities. But, you know, in fact, we've seen in the past that Trump will go ahead and proceed whether he's been asked to or not. So it remains to be seen whether in these other states he will actually take action. We know in Oregon that there has already been a lawsuit by the Attorney General who is basically saying these protesters have a right, a First Amendment right, to protest.
And there are also reports that federal officials dressed in camouflage have been driving around in unmarked vans and arresting people in Portland. Does it sound like these federal officers are operating under legal parameters, or is this something else that we haven't seen before?
It's a good question because they really should be identified and identifiable. The fact that these agents are coming in and it's unclear whether they are the military, whether they're the National Guard, whether they are from Homeland Security. It turns out that they were Homeland Security, but they should be identified because protesters have a right to know who it is they are facing and what it is that is going to happen to them under the auspices of how they are being handled and how they're being arrested. So it was in the dark of the night, the fact that these vans came up and they whisked these individuals off. There has been, you know, some videos showing that this occurred, and it's a very frightening situation.
Yeah, very, very strange. I know that what they were saying was that being in unmarked cars helped to protect the safety of those officers because in marked vehicles, they felt like they were more of a target. I'm wondering if that plays into any of this conversation. As you mentioned, Oregon's Attorney General filed a lawsuit against the federal government for unlawfully detaining protesters and violating their constitutional rights. I'm wondering how this is all likely going to play out in court.
I think that the Attorney General has a very good case here because, in fact, there is a First Amendment right to protest. And if these protesters, and we've seen they're not breaking the law, they are, in fact, exercising their First Amendment right. They aren't damaging property. In those instances, of course, they have a right to protest. This is the United States of America. It's part of our democracy. And sending troops in or agents in is really a violation of those rights. So I do think the Attorney General's lawsuit stands on very solid ground.